Well, let me get this up and running. Why am I seeing feet? Just a little bit of some music technology around.
One of these days, can I pick your brain? I need some help with overall planning of my property.
Sure, absolutely.
And, you know, I did the site design, know what the garden's gonna look like.
Right.
But it's just,
Overwhelming?
that's the exact word,
Yeah. Yep. Yep. It's yeah. And
How
you know,
big a property do you have, Ken?
5 acres.
Oh, yeah. Neat.
And it's all potentially functional. So,
Oh, that's nice. Oh, how exciting.
you know, some of it is, you know, what do you want to do with the property? You know, what are you going to raise livestock? Are you going to do chickens? Yes.
so I can't do livestock, and I'm not even allowed to do chickens, which burns my butt. Yeah,
Yeah, there are some.
we've got some restrictions. and things, you know, even on the county.
Heaven forbid.
No, it wouldn't be roosters, I just want
Well,
egg
that's
laying hens,
Yeah,
and roosters end up in a pot if there is one. Right.
that's where they belong, ultimately. And they usually earn that spot.
It is funny that you're, oh, is this, what's this? Is this picking it up?
Oh, someone's got the Elmo on.
Yeah. That's what's showing.
Yeah.
Huh. Kitty.
So in a perfect world, yes, there would be chickens and bees and vegetable garden and fruit trees and bushes and lots of flowers.
It's easy to hide the chickens.
I thought about that.
And I'd probably look at the homeowners and go,
I did,
"Bite yourself."
I did. And they said no, I'd have to petition the neighborhood to allow it. And I'm gonna do it, it's just when.
Yeah. Chickens are fun.
Yeah.
As long as you're careful with them, they're fun. Of course, my other side is going, oh my God, you know, Campylobacter,
Oh,
Listeria,
I don't worry about
Salmonella.
it. Sure.
But that's my other side.
Well, it was a fun weekend. I did 20 water jugs of
Oh, wow.
flowers.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're sitting out on the front porch where it's shaded and cold, and
Yeah, that's what they
protected
need.
from the wind.
That cold stratification is
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah. I mean, I'm stoked. I really am.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
Good.
So thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
We'll
Yeah, I'd
talk.
be more than happy to come out and help you try to do a plan of action out there.
Okay. I mean, I can show you the design of the property and what I've got so far and all that stuff. But I will never say no to an offer like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Nope, that's,
Oh, and then we've got a meeting tomorrow night. Native plants.
if it's with Nancy, probably yes.
That is the native plant thing tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she presented at the Hero Habitat for Heroes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Do you know if anybody who could use like a camera or computer? Coworker was getting the notes, I brought it in, see if anybody would like it.
Okay.
It's like a $75.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's
That's a nice one.
one I can use that easily enough.
Okay.
Yeah, trust me. All right, let me make sure my owl is plugged in.
Yes.
Not behaving like it is.
Or intense, you know, because it was
Okay.
It hooted at me. I guess that's okay. No, I heard it.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
So the alligator is tough.
Okay.
So,
I know this property.
yes, you do. It turns out it's a lot smaller because they deeded some to the city, so this is the section that we work with. And I know the wind goes in the winter this way and this way, northeast, northwest. So they have enough money to buy 4 trees. They put 4 here, but it was right by a hill here, so now the water would run down. I don't know why they did that.
The church is first.
Yeah.
So everything.
So this is a hill, that's a steep hill. This is flat with a water source. Here's the water source. This used to be a garden.
So what do you want to accomplish with these trees?
Pollinators, we want pollinators. We're an earth care congregation. So well, you know what I noticed? Flowers and berries from the earth.
I would probably do something. I'd make them
More wedding trees.
fantastic trees. And then I would have them to maybe come over here and shape. This slope is really difficult. It's-
Yeah.
You can see by the pictures.
Yeah.
It's very hard to treat. So I went online and I looked at and the trees are coming along. And everyone's got trees, but a lot of the trees a lot of that stuff goes because
I'm doing the
it's
best.
that July, August, September.
We've got some later garden here. They may make this a real garden again. They're kind of debating it. In actual garden, we're done. Right now it's just this tree is the one that this one is and so yeah, they're having to make a decision. And we have to set up a watering system of some kind because we did not water these trees. So we definitely do here or what is the option is completely.
So if you want your garden here, you can still keep it there. You can still put your name on it. And I don't recall the door over here, but there's windows, right?
Yeah, one we know is mostly for.
So your trees in here, it's going to change in the summer. And so in the winter, it's going to be that way. It's going to be that way.
And it was funny.
But this one, trees here.
So, but this is your favorite subject for anything.
I want this property. Very much been a while. Yeah. I want the property.
Oh, yeah.
It's, it's a challenge.
It is, and this is the city park. And it's really dry. That's the incredible.
Right. So mowing is just a dead to the.
I don't think they mow much here, now this section, they mow, and almost overrun. So, I was over, and this is just as dry as there's no water source over here, so we're really limited to one of these things.
I'm Laura. Nice
Nice to meet you. You said something about native plant meet series tomorrow night, you think? Okay. How would I find out more about that? Okay. All right. All right. Thank you.
I think it's down at the library.
Okay.
In one of those rooms.
Oh, okay. Okay.
This will help. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a friend that is
Anyway.
there.
Okay, sign in.
If it works with them.
Did you sign in? No. I know. Yes, for the event, yes, for something else. The guy was running at that time. Just really kind of shot back at us. So if you can get through that.
But, you know, we had to move, it's actually my friend's mom that's there, and we had to move her into memory care. And the one guy that was helping move the big furniture, wanted to take pictures, and we're like, that's hard, you know, that's our job. So, and he was very, oh, you should do this, so it might be the same guy, but I'll find out.
Right, thank you. Yes.
Okay.
You're busy with the bee college thing coming up, huh? That's okay. I figured that's what was happening. Oh, yeah. I sent her an email. I was asking her to be a speaker. April, she has a. Because she does that podcast, Facebook thing. Ask her to speak. Yeah, it's just another viewpoint. Getting everything done. And it's getting close.
It's getting close right now. It's still with them. So that's frustrating. Yeah, then I got an email from my wants to do
Okay, that sounds about right.
That's like every weekend.
Yeah.
Every weekend they got something.
I haven't been hearing much from him. He's busy with his grandkids. Second family.
So I don't know, it's kind of stretching me a little thin. I'm not. I'm not sure what benefit we get from
Well, people ask questions, it's an ask and answer garden. That's one of the places where they do ask questions. When you have a bee garden, bee college, it always asks questions. We did more people stop by and ask That's 18th, 19th. I was thinking about that. Should we have? We don't ever touch that. I know. See, that's what we need our ask. Somebody needs to chairperson.
Hey Kim, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
There's a series of American Build. And the one last
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to class. And I'm glad we had the capability of doing Zoom last week and didn't miss a beat, so that was cool. My Zoom room, if you've got an email from me, in my signature line at the bottom is my Zoom room, and it's a permanent Zoom room for me. And so even if you don't have or think you've got my Zoom room, it's always going to be on my email. It'll always be there. And Scott's program was pretty cool. Can you come help me real quick? Better in person because we get to mess around with bugs and key out bugs, look at bugs. But one of the things, yeah, I think insects are pretty cool. I don't necessarily like them on me, but I otherwise think they're pretty cool. But one of the other things that's really important as a master gardener is that you're also the front line for identifying or finding insects, particularly bad bugs. And right now we're watching for Japanese. We're looking for the Japanese beetle.
First of all, it's mirroring.
Yes.
And
Aren't familiar?
No.
right now the Japanese beetle is, they found some up in Sheridan. and I hope it was just a fluke. They have found them in Fort Collins. They're definitely in Nebraska. You can't miss them. They're big. They're like an inch and a fourth, and they're kind of humped up, and they're a metallic green. They're really pretty metallic green. They're really mediocre flyers, and they just sort of aim and hope that they get there. And I was in Missouri a couple of years ago, sitting under an elm tree, and I was just like getting hit in the head constantly by these beetles. And all I could think about was getting a trap up for them. But in entomology today, the title is Effective Management Remains Elusive for Beetles that Eat Almost Anything. And so they like anything within the Rosaceae family. A whole host of trees in there. There's roses, of course, and when they run out of that, they'll eat something else. So they're very, very difficult to control. Thank you. One of the few non-toxic things is milky spore, which is a bacteria that goes after them. And then the other creature we're looking for is the emerald ash beetle. And that's taken out almost all the ash trees back east. It was found down in Boulder, Broomfield, Berthoud. And right now the control method is to take out ash trees that aren't worth saving. And the ones that are worth saving, there's one chemical that controls it, and it's trunk injections. So don't ever let a tree service or a lawn care service say, oh, I'll spray your tree for the emerald ash beetle because it's ineffective. It doesn't work. So this beetle is like resistant to just a whole host of chemicals, but it's just one chemical that's a trunk injection. And an ash tree has got to be really, really meaningful and important to you in the landscape to want to do that because it's expensive. And you have to do it like every 3rd year. So those are the two big ones that we're looking for, the emerald ash beetle, and we'll talk more about it in the tree class. And then of course the Japanese beetle, which I'm hoping that between our winds and a really dry climate that it keeps it blown out of here. That's what I'm hoping for. So I am looking for some help the weekend of February. February 19th, which should be a Saturday, at the Farm and Ranch Expo out at Archer. And the extension office is going to have a booth out there, and we're going to have kind of a walkthrough display and some hands-on interactive stuff. And one of the things that I'm having Larry make for me out at the fairgrounds is a raised bed for a vegetable garden. And I'll just have like little fake vegetables to plant in there. And then I want to have a hands-on tree trimming, which I'll just go out on the fairgrounds and find an elm and just trim it and bring it in and bring my worst pair of pruners so that someone steals them, I'm not going to be heartbroken. And so there'll be some tree trimming and some vegetable gardening how-to. There's going to be a wheat growing display. Cowbells will be there talking about beef. There'll be a kids area with farm animals and a kids zone, fun play thing. So if you're interested in helping with the vegetable garden, or I can teach you how to prune a tree and how to teach other people to do that. And any time spent out there and with me would count for your hours. So. And it would just be like a couple hours at the most. I don't want you to spend the whole day. So if you're interested in just spending a couple hours, come out, play around, walk around, help educate people in vegetable gardens and tree trimming. Yep. Okay. Kim, right now you're muted. So tonight's class is with Kim Parker, and she is a master gardener. I think Kim goes way back to like 2003 or 2004 with her master gardener training, 2004. And she's been doing annuals and perennials for me and for several years, probably 10 years or better. And she's also, when Platte County of Wheeling has a master gardener program, she also teaches up there. And I think Kim has also taught over in Goshen County and Torrington too. So just thinking. So Kim is going to bring to us, I call this the fun flower class because it's a lot of pretty pictures and it's a lot of stuff that master gardeners are currently growing here in Laramie County and some of the stuff that's possible. And then I've asked Kim to also do just sort of a brief thing on houseplants because houseplants are not my forte. And part of it is I forget that they're there because I'm so busy doing other things outside. And then I have cats. Yes, yeah. Yeah, they like to eat them or play with them or sleep in them. Yeah. So I have good kitties, but they're a little hard on the inside foliage. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim. So Kim, this is your class, and I've got you set up as co-host so you can share your screen and PowerPoint program.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask really quick, do we want to take a break kind of middle of this session so that we can do bio breaks / snacks, whatever? I don't remember. We used to kind of set it up that way.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So I'll shoot for somewhere 7:30-ish maybe for that. If that's all right for everybody? I don't know exactly where we'll break. It kind of depends on how the discussion progresses. So I don't mind if you stop in the middle, ask me questions as we go. If you don't wish to do that, if you'd rather not do that, by all means, write your question down so that when we have a spot for questions, you don't go like, oh, shoot, I was going to ask her something, but I can't remember what it was. I do that all the time. I apologize for the mic noise. When we first got started, I realized that my screens weren't set up so that I could see my presentation and the Zoom screen. And I was like, fuck! Of course, then I lost my screen, so I couldn't mute myself. So thank you, Catherine, for muting me. I was like trying to do damage control over here. Okay, so basically, let me see if our thing to work like we want it. Come on. All right. No, are you seeing my slide, Catherine, or are you just seeing me still?
We're just seeing you still.
Okay.
So you're set up as co-host, so you can share.
Yeah, I'm just not real sure. It's now displaying on both screens again. Oh, technology, you gotta love it. Okay. Well, let's try something else. Let me go ahead and try to share my screen here. Okay, so the long and short of this is I may not be able to see the chat screen while I'm talking if this does indeed take over both screens like I think it will. So that's even more important that you keep track of your questions, and I'll try to pause every once in a while and give us a chance to talk about things if I haven't covered that already. And like I said, this used to be a full-blown pushing 3 hours kind of presentation, and it was fun but grueling. And I don't expect that we have quite that much material here this time, but you know, I think we were almost at 3 hours last time, Catherine, with discussion and what have you. And that's kind of the way I like it, is where I show you enough things that you go like, oh, well, what about, and that we can talk about that. So please do save your questions and we can talk about them. Just a little bit of background about me. I came to this whole thing. Can you see my slides there now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Oh boy. Do you see just one big slide, or are there the slides on the side?
Slides on the side.
Yeah, see, I'm showing full screen on my Zoom screen, but not over here where the screen I'm sharing. That's really bizarre. Sorry, you guys. All right. Come on.
So Kim's forte in college was actually riparian management. So I've got a ton of technology.
Wow, you know, I just don't really understand why it's not allowing me to switch over to the slideshow option.
Okay.
I guess I'm just gonna have to kind of look at, well, now that's promising. Okay. All right, let me do this. There's a chance that if I share a different screen, maybe that will work. I'm sorry, you guys. Ah.
So in the meantime, I am passing around an article on the Japanese beetle. And that way you get an idea. If you don't already know what they look like, you'll get an idea. Once you see one, you'll never forget it. How many of you have encountered Japanese beetles? Yeah. Yeah, were there a lot of them, a lot of problems down where you were at? Yeah.
Never an inch big. I mean, that's scary.
When I was in Missouri, that's how big they were. Yeah, yeah. And then even when I was in Fort Collins, I ran across some that were really big. And the ones I came across were feeding on the sap of a cottonwood tree. And there wasn't just one or two of them, there was about a dozen. And so when we talk about pruning trees and caring for trees, one of the important things is that you don't prune in the summer. But that's when most of the tree care companies go out and prune. And as soon as you've got that cut and that tree starts to sap, it's like a big sign that says, come here and eat. And especially in pine trees, you cut a pine tree in the summer, and it's just a flood of sap, and it just goes all over the place. It's pretty nasty. So when you prune a tree, it should be when it's dormant. Ideally when it's dormant. Got it, Kim.
Okay. Is that the full screen slide now?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Like I said, I had my monitors not numbered right. So yeah, there was still evidently a hangover from that. So, all right. So let's just go right ahead and jump in here. My background, as Catherine was kind of saying, is I started to learn botany when I started working for the Forest Service, chasing cows around, trying to figure out how much they were eating. And it was really quite challenging because you have to try to figure out what the plant was when there was only 2 inches of it left. So, and then you had to try to figure out, okay, well, that plant should look like this, which means they've eaten X percent of it. So it was they kind of threw you into the deep end and you learned botany pretty quick. And I just discovered that I really enjoyed it. So my primary focus, my education has all been on native plants rather than ornamentals. So when I became a master gardener, I was kind of floundering about, they said, oh, well, that's a such and such. And if it wasn't a native plant, I didn't have a clue what it was. So just so you know, I started where many of you are right now, back in 2004. So, all right. So that's kind of my bias. And I did get a master's degree in riparian ecology, like Catherine was saying. So that is another one of my loves, are the plants that grow in and around the waterways. So, okay, today our focus is going to be just to give you guys some overview of some of the challenges to gardening in Cheyenne. I'm pretty sure most of you are aware of a lot of them anyway. And we're going to introduce you to some low maintenance, high performing perennial flowers and give you some ideas on how to create beautiful pollinator friendly landscapes from spring to fall. So my presentation is organized with the bulbs in the front and ending up with the fall blooming plants at the end. And then we go into the house plants. And when Catherine said she just wanted about 10 minutes on that, I kind of laughed because you could do a full 3-hour presentation on house plants. So anyway, we'll see how, it's probably more than 10 minutes, Catherine.
Okay.
All right. But anyway, and then the last, as we go along, hopefully we can give you some gardening tips and tricks that you may not have already discussed in Catherine's classes. So first thing we really have to talk about, and I'm sure that you've already seen this, you already know about this, but if you're going to garden anywhere, you need to know what your zone is. And you'll notice that these pretty colored bands roughly are equivalent to latitude, which is kind of day length type of things. But you'll notice, especially around the mountainous areas where there's elevation changes, that it really gets broken up. So also there is an elevation component to this, temperatures. And here's Wyoming's map, a little zoom in on that. And so you can kind of see that, shoot, we go everything from 5B, which is the warmest in the state, clear up through to zone 3A. So, I mean, we've got a spread here in Wyoming. In Cheyenne, we are zone 5B, which is the warmest of the two zone 5s. But you want to plant zone 4 stuff anyway. Okay. So USDA hardiness zones were actually developed for farming communities so that they knew which zones, which plants they could plant for farming. It was based on agricultural production. And they readjust that zone, or they recalculate the zones every 30 years. So we just recently got ours recalculated in 2005. And we actually were a zone 5A, I think, at the time. So we've gotten warmer. And so it shows that our average low temperature is -10 to -15. Of course, we just had one of those this last week. And but honestly, I can remember times where we would have a week of -10 temperatures. So I wouldn't doubt it at all if the next time they recalculate that in, let's see, it would be 2035, that it's probably going to get even warmer. Okay, so the zone is one thing, but then you really kind of need to talk about microclimate, or a plant's location. Where is it planted? What conditions exist right around that plant? And the big thing here in Cheyenne is wind exposure. There is just a phenomenal amount of water loss that can happen for a plant when it is exposed to the drying wind or the chilling wind. It can make the plant seem as if it's colder than what the mercury says. The other things you'll notice is that soil type has a big effect on what can grow where, and the soil texture, pH and moisture. And then also the humidity. If it's a microclimate that might be slightly more humid, you might see things survive there that wouldn't survive elsewhere. And or if there's a little place for more precipitation to land there, or a snowdrift to collect, that you might see a difference on how a plant survives there. And then something to consider is that plants can often do okay with any one, possibly two stressors. But if you start piling on multiple stressors, the survivability of that plant will really suffer. So just keep that in mind. You know, it might not be the fact that it's exposed to the wind. It might be because it's also, you know, really sandy soil there instead of a clay or soil that it wants. So there's multiple layers there that you need to consider when you figure out what might be a good spot to plant something. And then also something to talk about here, a really big challenge for our trees is the fact that we rarely have winter snow cover. And then if you think about it, we typically, like today, I think it was 46, 48, something like that. And then it's probably going to drop down below freezing. That is really hard on trees, where you have nice, warm, sunshiny days, especially the conifers that are transpiring all year long, but yet the ground is still frozen, so they're not able to pull in new water. So that's something to, you know, every time you get a thaw, like we'll get one in March, run out there and water your conifer trees because they're going to need a drink. But that is definitely challenging for our trees in Cheyenne area. And, you know, when your diurnal temperature fluctuates between, you know, 40 degrees in the daytime and 20 degrees at night, that's a big swing in temperature. So that is a challenge for us. So here's some climate stats, and these came off of the NOAA website, and they were so clever in their website redesign that I still have not found the stats page again. So I'm sure it's there somewhere, but so right now these are kind of dated, and I apologize for that. But if you are persistent and you really want to figure this stuff out, if you're a weather geek like I am, this is out there. That data exists. They collect it, and I'm sure it's on the web somewhere. I just don't know where. So in 2014, our average wind speed was 12.2 miles per hour. The highest wind speed was straight line was 51 miles per hour, gusting to 66. Well, yeah, well, there's years where we gust to 80, right? So this can change dramatically based on the year. And our wind direction is usually out of the northwest. Precipitation in 2014 was 18.2 inches, which is high for us. Our average is 16. We had an average of 225 days of sunshine, which is 62%, almost 2/3 of the year, with only 24 days a year that were considered cloudy. And that's where you can't really see the sky. It's going to be completely socked in. Average relative humidity was 56%, which is on the low side. We average here in Cheyenne, one of the other main challenges to gardening is our thunderstorms and hail. So we average 50 days a year that have severe thunderstorms. And in Laramie County, we have 3 times as many damaging hail events as any other county. So we're the #1 in Wyoming by many times over. So, and then also considering the fact that we have that many severe thunderstorms, tornadoes can often come with that. And if I had to choose hail over tornadoes, I would choose the hail. Although we've had some severely damaging hailstorms. I typically get, where I am up on the ridge, I typically can count on 2 damaging hailstorms every year. So why I haven't built a hail structure over my garden yet is beyond me. I guess it's just not something we've had time to do yet, but we're working on it. Okay, then the other thing that's kind of cool about the Cheyenne growing season, there is climate data out there to help you gauge when to plant and when to anticipate a freeze. And so that type of information is talked about, like a frost-free days for your growing season, usually expressed as probabilities. For example, there's a 90% chance that you will not have a frost after this date, you know, or that you will have at least 116 frost-free days. Our average is, or the median is 137 frost-free days. And a year kind of like we had last year, where it's so long and so warm, is probably going to be in that range, 158. And I put there the frost-free days for Jackson, just in case you start feeling, you know, like somebody's beating up on you. Well, you could live in Jackson, where they've got a 90% chance that they'll have at least 12 days without frost. So, and a whole month and, well, 5 weeks. Let's be generous and call 36 days 5 weeks. They've got a pretty good chance of having 5 weeks of frost free. So gardening in Jackson is a whole different ball of wax than what we have here in Cheyenne. Okay, and then we're talking about average freeze dates. That's another good measure to know. So, and this is also kind of structured like a percentage. So the day when we have less than 10% chance that we'll have a freeze is May 26th. So I never plant my garden until Memorial Day weekend, because I want to even be after that. And keep in mind that a lot of times your soil is still really cold. So, you know, your tomatoes will thank you if you wait an extra week and let it warm up a little bit. I think this last year we had, I don't know if we had a freeze over Memorial Day, but it was down like in the low 40s. I think I remember we were running our heater in our greenhouse over Memorial Day weekend. And then on the other side, where you have pretty close and almost sure that you'll have a frost by October 8th. So that kind of puts the brackets on your growing season. And there again, Jackson, July 26th to September 1st. So it's a different perspective on it. All right. Okay. Just real quick, let's do some definitions here. I'm sure these are things that you have talked about already, but perennial plants, what we're talking about here is a plant that lives for more than 2 years, to differentiate among annual and biennial plants. So typically biennial plants, meaning 2 years, those are going to grow for a minimum of 2 years. There are many biennial, quote unquote, biennial plants that take longer than 2 years to reach their flowering stage. And then after they flower, they die. And that can just be a resource scarcity. Like, for example, a lot of plants in the desert can take sometimes even 50 or 100 years to build up enough resources in order to flower. Okay. Per and ennial, which means through the years. So that's kind of how we get that name with it's a plant that's going to last many years. Indicators of a perennial plant, you're going to see maturation that takes at least 1 year, often multiple years or even decades for the plant to mature and to start to set seed and make offspring. If you think about a spruce tree, for example, that's going to take at least 20, 25, 30 years before they start making cones. You know, your some of your other trees are faster, but that is kind of what you're looking at. And there's even trees that take longer than that to mature. So a perennial plant will flower and set seed more than once. Okay, we talked about biennials. As soon as they flower and set seed, they'll die. And a perennial plant will flower and set seed year after year after year. And generally, the more longer lived the plant, the longer it takes to get to maturity, and the more years it will flower and set seed. And a perennial plant often will also do what's called vegetative reproduction, where in other words, they make a clone of themselves. So they use stolons or rhizomes or underground or above ground roots. In fact, one of the largest organisms on planet Earth is an aspen clone out in the Wasatch Mountains in Utah. So that's just kind of an interesting tidbit. You know, if you look at an aspen on a slope with aspen trees, all of the ones that have the same color, the same, you know, as the seasons progress, you can see, like, especially noticeable in the spring and the fall, your different clones can really stand out. You can kind of see, oh, wow, that one looks totally different. Wow, that one's already got its leaves and the others are just starting to bud out. So that's typically how you can kind of pick up on the fact that you've got the same clone. All right, and also perennial plants do what's called storage of carbohydrates because they have to be able to survive the winter. So they store their carbohydrates to survive dormancy. And like if you're talking Kentucky bluegrass, your dormancy period is going to be also during a period of heat stress, usually in midsummer when it gets dry and hot. Bluegrass lawns left to their own devices will go dormant during that period to conserve their energy for when it's cooler and moister in the spring and the fall. All right, so you'll see them storing carbohydrates in roots, rhizomes, corms, bulbs, tubers, anything like that. And a good rule of thumb that is if you have a plant that has biomass above ground, there is likely an equal or greater biomass below ground. So think about that time next time you see a big cottonwood tree, and you will understand why those narrow leaf cottonwood trees come up in your yard instead of just in your neighbor's, because there's an entire tree's worth of biomass under the soil where they're storing carbohydrates to survive the winter. Yeah, my neighbor's narrow leaf cottonwood tree has come up now all over in my yard and is working on the neighbor uphill of me on the other side from the tree. So yeah, it's getting to be a mature tree. All right, hardy perennials live through most winters. So in other words, native plants are going to be automatically classed as hardy perennials. They're native to the area. They're evolved to grow and survive here in that area. And so you want to look for native plants and plants that are rated for cold hardiness zones. Like for here in Cheyenne, hardy perennials to me is zone 4 and below. So zone 4, 3, 2, whatever. Zone 5 plants will grow here probably 18 years out of 20. But then there's going to be a zone 4 winter. So I like to just try to plant zone 4 stuff to start with. Tender perennials, those are going to things that will not survive our winters here. And so that means that they're hardy in zones 5 and above, 5, 6, 7, 8. Must be lifted in the fall and stored until spring. Things like gladiolus and dahlias would be in this category. I have heard rumors that there's some gardeners here in Cheyenne that can not have to lift their gladiolus, and they must have a very nice cozy spot for those glads to survive the winter with, or else they mulch them or do them something there. I want to try to see one of these years if I can overwinter a rosemary plant. It's supposedly a zone 6 or 7. So chances are not good, but at the same time, who knows? Maybe if I find the right microclimate, it'll work. But, and then we also have to talk about short-lived perennials. And again, these are not biennials per se. These live, flower, and die usually within, say, 3-4 years. So they usually flower profusely. Now, penstemons are often in this group. They literally flower themselves out. They put more resources into developing seed and flowers than they would maybe need to continue on in a long-lived situation. Now, most foxgloves, I'll have to note here, are biennial. In other words, they make their basal rosette the first year, they flower the second, and then they die. But there are some perennial foxgloves, but they are definitely not one of those plants that you would expect to survive for longer than maybe 4 or 5 years. Okay, any questions on that kind of stuff? Probably already heard all that. Okay, and then there's some other things I'm going to discuss, some terms I'll throw around here. A native plant is a plant that has evolved in or is indigenous to an area. In North America, we refer to native plants as plants that were here before European colonization, generally before large-scale agricultural changes happened, okay? A naturalized plant is a non-native plant that has spread into its new environment and whose population has become self-sustaining. A good example would be dandelions. Dandelions come from Europe. They are not native. On the other hand, there is absolutely no way we're going to get rid of them. They're here to stay. Okay, weeds are an unwanted plant in a human-controlled setting, such as a field, garden, lawn, etc. Weed does not have a botanical meaning. It is just basically, what do you think is a weed? I've known people to think very beautiful flowers are weeds. So it just kind of depends on your point of view and what you want to be there and what you don't want to be there. Invasive. Now, this is one that you really have to pay attention to. This is a naturalized plant. So in other words, it's not a native, but it has naturalized to the point that it's so successful, it can outcompete the natives. Okay, and then it can spread unchecked. So really good examples of this would be like cheatgrass, leafy spurge, any of the weeds on our invasive weed list in Wyoming. And there's, I don't know, Catherine, how many weeds do we have? Is like 30 some? Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's like literally, if you have leafy spurge come into a field, nothing else will grow. It crowds everything else out, or it takes up all the water. Cheatgrass is really sneaky. It'll germinate when even just the top 1/8 of an inch of soil is thawed, and it's up and growing before anything else is out of dormancy. It exhausts the soil water, then it dries up and burns and kills all the other plants in the fire. So I mean, it is very well adapted to that type of lifestyle, and because nothing else can compete with it, it has completely taken over rangelands. Ironically, we planted it because we thought it would be a good forage grass. All right. So this is my little slide here that says it's not a weed if I want it there. This is a little plant that I allow to grow in my rock garden because it makes these cheery little sunflower things. They're about 1/2 inch wide, inch wide. And you ask almost any rancher anywhere and he's like, I hate that weed. But I like it because it's cheery and it's easy to pull the seedlings I don't want, and it makes a load of seed for the birds. So that's kind of why I grow it. I think that's Heterotheca villosa, but Okay, this is a poke at the governor. I don't think he knew that there was toad flax growing in his cinder block beds in between the Hirschler building and the Capitol building. But yeah, that one is on our invasive weed list, so that one should not be there. So how do you find good plants? There are an endless variety of plants, but how do you know which ones are the good ones? Okay, if you're going to plop down $8 to $50, $100 for a plant, you want to make sure you're buying a good one that's going to survive here. There are several places that test plant varieties. The Perennial Plant Association, they have a plant of the year. Really cool stuff there if you want to go look at it. And then All American Selection, or AAS, is a plant testing organization established, gosh, almost 100 years ago now, 90 years ago, that tests new varieties of annual and perennial plants in over 200 test gardens nationwide. So they really kind of canvas all the different types of growing scenarios that might be experienced. And if you have a plant that's AAS winner or a selection, it's likely going to be a good one. And almost anymore, when I'm finding seeds in catalogs, I'll look and I say, oh, wow, that looks like a pretty good variety. Right next to it, there's an AAS selection variety. I'll buy the AAS selection variety because I know that it's been tested and that it's going to have very consistent performance. And then also, especially for our area, Plant Select plants, really fantastic plants. You do have to kind of keep a watch on them because they do have some zone 5s. And there again, I'd recommend going with zone 4s unless you have a little bit of a protected spot. But that's a collaboration between the Denver Botanic Gardens and the Colorado State University. And they go worldwide to find plants that survive well, natives in our area or in other biomes. Like, say, there's a lot of plants that come from Turkey that has a very, very similar climate to ours and they do really well here. So they'll bring back candidates and then they'll grow them out in test gardens to see which ones really do well here. And then they test it to see if that can actually come into if they can propagate it well enough to sell it. So they've been doing this, gosh, I want to say since the early 90s. And you can go and look at all of them, and just about anything they have as a Plant Select plant will do well in your garden. I can guarantee that. Good, and some of them are just fantastic plants. All right, and then also I want to mention the Rocky Mountain Rock Garden Society. They have an annual plant sale. Of course, the last couple of years because of COVID, I don't think they've had it. They may have it this spring though. They usually hold that down at the Denver Botanic Gardens. And it makes a nice day trip. You can go down there, shop at the plant sale, get some really cool stuff, and then tour the Botanic Gardens afterwards. And usually it's just right about when the cherry trees are blooming and all the daffodils and tulips and stuff are up. So it's kind of a neat time to go visit the garden. Then also we have a new Laramie County Master Gardener Native Plant Committee that Nancy Lummis is heading up. And so I know she's doing some work with native plants and trying to collect seeds and share them. So check with her if you're interested in native plants. One word of advice: it is illegal to collect plant parts, plant seeds, flowers, dig up a plant on public land unless you have a collection permit. If you have somebody who's got some private land and they don't mind sharing, then by all means, but just be aware that if you're doing that on public land, you're going to need to get a permit first. And then also we've got the LCMG seed library. And I know I sent over about a cup full of showy milkweed seeds this spring. So if you want some, go get them. Just after, and then also just if there's something you're looking for, it may be that one of your fellow master gardeners has it growing and wouldn't mind sharing. I have a whole rock garden full of stuff that if you guys want some, you just let me know. Okay, now I talk a little bit about designing perennial flower beds. And here's where I have to fess up. I can't do this worth a hoot, okay? I have to experiment. I have a good plan, I implement it, and then I have to tweak the heck out of it to get it to work like I like it. So, but that's okay. I mean, I enjoy puttering, so we can do it. But there are some gardeners that are much better at design than I am. So one of the things you're going to want to consider is the plant long-lived? About 4 years at the minimum, or does it reseed itself so it seems like it's a perennial? You don't want something that's going to outcompete the neighbors and just run over everything else. So you kind of want to keep that in mind. Will it have a long bloom time? And is it going to be complementary to the other plants in the bed? Kathy Shreve, who's another master gardener and does do a good job with perennial plant bed arrangement and design, she said that one of the things to mention to you guys is if you are planning out a bed, what you can do is you can go online and find pictures of the plant in bloom and just print it off, and you just kind of make a little collage to see how stuff looks together. And I thought that was a really good idea. She also says she keeps track of a bloom time. She makes a bloom time chart so that she knows which plants to put together, you know, so that she has coverage season long, as well as, okay, these two pinks are going to battle, but they're not going to be blooming at the same time. So that's kind of how she schedules those out. And then just keep in mind that, you know, is it an okay plant to look at for the, you know, almost all of the year that it's not going to be in bloom. If it's a really scraggly plant, maybe you don't want it. And then also please consider pest and disease resistance. There are some plants that are just fantastic, but they've always got spider mites or they've always got aphids, and you just, you know, it's a pest magnet, or it doesn't perform unless you fertilize it constantly. So just keep that in mind. There are some things that, you know, like Penstemons, they're a short-lived plant, but I love them, so they're going to be in my garden no matter what. So I guess you can kind of figure out what's important to you. Also consider how stuff is going to look for winter interest. I am the kind of gardener that I go in every March when we get that warm spell in March before things start to grow, and I clear out the dead stuff from my garden, but I do like to leave the stems and the mounds of grasses and what have you in the garden during the winter, because it gives me something to look at. Excuse me. Let's talk a little bit about bed preparation. In Cheyenne, it seems like you either have clay soils or you have sandy soils, and ne'er the twain shall meet, it seems. So you're usually going to have to amend a very clayey soil to break it up, and or add organic matter to sandy soil to increase its water retention, that sort of thing. So it turns out that organic matter is good for both of those. So the best thing you can do is amend with a good quality mulch or organic matter to about 1/3 by volume. So that's a lot if you think about it. And you need to do it every year for about 50 years before your soil will be quote unquote good. So it's an act of devotion every year. So till or spade down to 12 inches and then double dig for deep rooted perennials. Obviously, you're not going to be digging after you plant the bed. But if you need to incorporate organic matter in there, the time to do it is before you plant, because once you plant those perennials, you're going to not want to disturb their root zone overly much because it could affect their survivability, especially if you're doing low water gardening. Their root systems, those low water plants, are typically pretty extensive. And then fertilizer with slow release fertilizer if needed. Not everything needs fertilized all the time. So just consider that. Sometimes you're just, you know, running high nitrogen water down the gutter and that's about all you're doing. Plant spacing is very important for perennials, for healthy growth and also longevity. I made the mistake when I was first setting up my garden. I wanted X number of roses in the corner of my fence, my back corner of my yard. And so I put the roses there. And as soon as they got to their mature size, they were so crowded that I got black spot fungus. And now I'm probably going to have black spot fungus for the rest of my life in that back corner bed. And sure enough, the roses there failed to thrive. They died. It was just not good for them. And I introduced a pest that, you know, it's pretty much impossible to get rid of. So word to the wise, don't crowd your plantings because they will grow. Look it up on the label. And if it doesn't have a label, look it up online. Okay. The internet is a fantastic tool. There's almost everything you can find on the web. But especially when you're planting trees. If it says that it's going to be 30 foot wide and 100 foot tall, it's going to get that way eventually. So don't put that critter any closer than 15 feet from your house, because otherwise the tree branches are going to be hitting the side of your house. But yeah, you'd be surprised how many people don't think of that when they plant their conifers. They want one right in the middle of their yard, but the yard isn't big enough to hold the tree they plant. It's kind of like bringing home a St. Bernard puppy, you know, and thinking it's going to fit in a little tiny carrier. It's not for very long anyway. So anyway, that's what you need to do when you're planting perennial gardens, is stuff will spread. You're going to want to select plants that do well with the same light and watering regime. So don't plant really xeric plants with stuff that needs to be watered once a week, because you'll kill your xeric plants. Consider different bloom times and make sure that the colors match, or that they are where you want them when you want them. Now, this is the part that I'm really bad at. I can see the plant when it's mature and visualize what the bloom looks like, but I have trouble. I have gaps in my garden. So I have to do the edit type of garden design, which is, you know, after a couple of seasons go by and stuff is settled in, I'm like, you know, I need something that blooms like right now. And so the best thing that I've figured out to do is to go visit a greenhouse and see what's blooming right now. And then bring it home, or go to a good friend's garden who has a lovely yard and say, hey, do you suppose you could tell me what that critter is? I want one for my yard. Or if it's the type that spreads, maybe they'll even let you have some of it. So like I said, I garden by editing. So if a plant isn't doing well where I planted it, or if, like I said, one pink or one blue is fighting with another, you can figure out, well, okay, let's put something white in between, or I'm going to move that pink. A good example is in this bed here, I planted a Princess Louise poppy and a peony. Seashells, I think was the variety name. Both of them are pink, but one of them is an orange pink and the other is a petal pink, and they just clashed and they came out at the same time. And I'm like, oh boy. So I moved the poppy, but that's kind of how you could do that. Don't be afraid to do it. And then, like I said, if there's always master gardeners who want to share some, or, you know, if you see something in somebody else's yard, don't be afraid to ask. Okay, let's talk about mulch. Mulch is pretty important here. And I actually had a phone call with a friend of mine who gardens in Phoenix, Arizona today. And he asked me about mulch. He says, you guys probably don't use mulch up there, right? And I'm like, oh no, yeah, we do. We need mulch up here. And the reason is, several reasons, is it keeps your soil moisture in the soil, so it saves water. It evens out the moisture of the soil, so you're not getting wet and then drying and getting wet and drying. So it's keeping it uniformly moist. And also it helps prevent weeds. So there's a couple different kinds of mulch you can use. Organic mulches like wood chips, compost, grass clippings, or even newspaper will break down and add organic matter to your soil. So that's kind of a benefit also. You're going to want to use at least a 3 to 4 inch deep layer in order to make sure that you've got that nice moisture retention and also preventing seed from sprouting, your weed seeds from sprouting. Be careful if you're putting that around trees, you're going to want to kind of make a little well in the compost so that it's not right up against the trunk. You don't want to encourage fungus. We don't want fungus. Inorganic mulches like pea gravel can also help, and it's very common in rock gardens to use a rock or a gravel mulch. Just keep in mind that a gravel mulch is not, it's going to fill up with dirt eventually. So eventually it's not going to suppress the weeds. You might have to add more, or, you know, rake it to bring the rocks back up to the surface. What you see with xeriscape, yeah, it's the bigger the rock, the longer it takes for the weeds to start to grow, but they will. And if you think back to that picture of that Dalmatian toadflax, it was growing in a giant deep bed of cinder. And you wouldn't think there was any way that a critter could grow in that at all, but that cinder had broken down and made kind of a clayey soil, and that seed took advantage of it. So yeah, that happens even with rock. So something to think about. Also, rock is hot. If you have like the xeriscape, quote unquote xeriscaping, where they do the rockscapes, that can be really hot. If you have it right up underneath your bedroom window or something up against the side of the house, that is going to retain heat in the summertime, make it really hot. Just a thought. Okay, let's start talking about plants. Are there any questions on the boring stuff? Something just dinged. Do we have a chat or anything?
Take care of it.
Oh, somebody wanting to come in. Okay, sorry about that. So what we did up until now is probably just kind of boring stuff. Possibly reiteration of what you guys already know. Let's start the fun part of this class, and we're going to start talking about the bulbs, which come, these are going to be the first thing in the growing season that start to bloom. And I'm going to focus mostly on the hardy naturalizing bulbs. When you get the bulb catalogs and they show all these gorgeous bulbs, you're like, oh, I want those. Do yourself a favor. When you dig holes for tulips or daffodils and you have to go down 8 inches, that's a pretty substantial hole. I don't know about you, but I can't schedule time and energy to do that every year. So I want stuff that's going to last a good long while, and or naturalize even. So those are these are the type of bulbs that will naturalize for you. So reticulated iris, crocus, daffodils, grape hyacinths. If you get tulips, look for species tulip, Greggii, Kaufmannii, Darwin, and emperor tulips. Those are the most hardy and most likely to naturalize. If the bulbs can't completely recharge though, like for example, I have many of my tulips are underneath my neighbor's aforementioned narrowleaf cottonwood tree, and they get too much shade to recharge. So I see them gradually kind of fading out. And so I'll have to replant them eventually, but that's okay. They've lasted probably 10 years, so that's not too bad. Okay, so right after I did my main bulb planting, this is what my garden did look like. And like I said, sadly, a lot of those have kind of faded away because the tree shaded out the bulbs too much for them to recharge. But so if you want to plant bulbs, you're looking at October to November. The soil needs to be cool so they don't think it's springtime and start to sprout. But yet it cannot be frozen. You want to give that bulb time to grow its roots before the soil freezes. So you can get away with planting bulbs usually, you know, Thanksgiving weekend kind of, but don't push it any longer than that. And even some years that's not going to work. So just keep an eye on that. We do have a bulb sale in the fall, and I think Kathy has those order forms due at the end of August. So she tries to get those to you, you know, mid to late September so you can plant them at the right time. You're going to want to use a low nitrogen bulb fertilizer when planting, and again during bloom and when the leaves are green. Otherwise, the plant is dormant and it doesn't need fertilizer. Some people use bone meal. Be cautious, however, because if I can smell it when it's covered under 8 inches of dirt, your neighbor's dog can smell it too. I have a lot of people, same thing with fish meal, blood meal, anything like that. That's a pretty good fertilizer for bulbs, but I can't handle the smell of it myself anyway. So that plus the dog problem, use something different. All right, you can plant in trenches or plant in holes, and you'll notice that I prefer the planting in holes method. You dig one hole and put a bunch of bulbs in it and then cover it back up. If you plant in a trench, be aware that if some of your plants start to drop out, it's going to look really weird and you'll have to replant your trench, because otherwise you'll have gaps in your row. But you know, just whatever works for you. You're going to want to water when the flowers or leaves are present, and otherwise they're dormant. You know, they don't want a lot of water, and in fact they can rot if they have too much water. So be really careful if you have a place where water accumulates, ponds, at the bottom of your downspout, say. Make sure that it's a kind of bulb that likes wet feet, otherwise you'll lose it. Okay, this has got to be one of my favorite plants, is a reticulated iris. It's growing right next to a plant called Glory of the Snow, or Chianodoxia. I love these little irises. They start poking their noses out right around Valentine's Day. I just checked this afternoon and they're not up yet. Of course, we've had some snow cover, so it may take them a little longer than normal to come out, but they just start to see the tips of their stems kind of poking out. They won't bloom until right around April 1st. But by golly, you can tell they're getting ready, and that's kind of a neat thing to watch those. They only get about 4 inches tall. They are a zone 5, but by golly, they are just so beautiful, so vibrant when they come out. It's worth it. Okay, and then just a little bit after that, the snow crocus will start to bloom. And those bloom about 2 weeks ahead of when the giant crocus will bloom. Now I wanted to show here, I've got my crocus planted in my lawn. And this works pretty well because the lawn is usually dormant when the crocus bloom. But I have found that especially in years where we get a lot of spring rain, the grass starts growing before the bulbs can recharge. So I lose gradually my crocus. But it does make your dormant bluegrass lawn look a heck of a lot prettier than it would otherwise. And just to prove that there's bees out, there they are. There's a little picture of a bee there on a crocus. These are only 3 to 6 inches tall, depending. The snow crocus are shorter. The giant crocus are taller. They get up to the 6 inches tall, and that's definitely zone 4. So that's the good hardy one. If they're in a happy place, they will definitely naturalize for you. Pardon me. Okay, daffodils and narcissi. These are just a joyous little flower in the spring when it's been gray and dark and wintry. These start showing up in April, and depending on the type that you get, some of them can bloom even through the end of May. So you can really have a good long season of daffodils blooming. Some of the smaller ones, like I think this is tete-a-tete, these are only about 6 inches tall, and they can start coming up. They say February. I've never seen them come up in February in my yard, but definitely they'll come up first thing in April. And then the later ones are often the bigger double ones, and they're the ones that'll go into May. And like I said, a whole variety of colors, heights, and bloom times. And most of these are zone 3, so absolutely no problem here. Now here we go with the tulips, and these usually go from sometime in April to the end of May, sometimes even into early June. The one down here in the bottom right-hand corner, that one, that's a gem, Batali's gem, and that one blooms at the end of May into June. And so it's kind of a nice wrap-up tulip. Excuse me. And you'll see over here on the left-hand side, we've got these Sweetheart Emperor tulips. These are the ones that are having trouble recharging if you plant them under a shade tree. But like I said, shoot, they've been growing there for 7-8 years now. And it kind of at the same time as the pasque flowers, so pretty early. The middle is Burning Heart. That's a later tulip. And I wanted to show you, here is a little species tulip coming. I interplanted that in my lawn as well. And it is literally in the middle of a snowstorm doing its thing. So yeah, they're very, very hardy. Species tulip, when I said not everybody might know what a species tulip is. So this is what the species tulips look like. They almost, yeah, they're short usually, and they're got very pointy petals. But there's a huge variety of species and also different colors, different heights. And like I said, the Batalini, sorry, that is the bright gem again, and that's during a rainstorm. So it just looked really pretty, I thought, with all the rain on it. But yeah, these are some of the first to come out usually, except for the bright gems. And so in springtime, the stuff that grows in springtime is usually the same stuff that it blooms about the same time as tulips. And they often like dappled shade. And that's why I planted a lot of these underneath my shade tree, because I thought, well, the leaves won't be out on the tree yet, and we can use that spot for spring flowers. Some good options are pasque flower. I love pasque flowers. And primrose are a good spring flower. Basket of gold. Now, the basket of gold likes full sun. Windflowers and Veronica. So let's look at some of those here. So another good one is a grape hyacinth. And I also want to give thanks to some of the folks that have shared their pictures with me. So Kathy Shreve, Barb Gorgeous, Catherine, and Lori, can't remember her last name, starts with a C. anyway, several people have shared their photos with me for this presentation. So thank you very much for sharing your pictures with me. And what I plan to do for next year is get some photo credit statements on there so that I don't forget whose pictures were whose. Oh, and Michelle Bohannon also has contributed some. The grape hyacinths, most of them are Muscari armeniacum, like as in from Armenia. And that was introduced in the late 1800s. So most of the Muscari around are this species, but not all of them. They're doing a lot of hybridizing and a lot of bringing other species to market. So there's a wider selection than there used to be. And they now come in colors from white, yellow, pink, and blue. Kathy Shreve tells me that the ones that aren't blue are not quite as hardy here, however. And they get to about 8 inches tall, zone 4 plants, very hardy. And they really, if you plant them along a walkway or along a sidewalk, they will drop their seed and spread by bulbules right along the edge. So it doesn't take very many years before you've got a nice little border of Muscari, so, or the grape hyacinth. So that's kind of a neat plant. Pasque flower, these are just a beautiful purple. Not only purple, they also come in red and pink. They come in single and double, and they will gladly hybridize with each other. So if you really like purple ones and you don't want who knows what color it might make if you have a hybrid, make sure that you don't plant the red or any other color close to your purple ones. And then they also make these really fun kind of Dr. Seuss looking seed heads, and they will reseed moderately. In the years I've been growing them, I think I might have a dozen plants, you know, so they don't reseed a lot. But because it's a woodland plant, I kind of ascribe to the thought that if it has decided it wants to grow there, I'm going to leave it there. So this is another way to let your garden edit itself, is if something comes up and it's not in a place where it's bad, it's going to be happy there, let it go. All right, these bloom early May. And like I said, right up there with the tulips and daffodils and things. So this is a nice purple color to go with those other bright colors. Here's the basket of gold, and you just cannot beat this color of yellow. This comes on usually a little later than your daffodils, and it of course wants to be in full sun, and it can handle very dry conditions. Actually, I think it could completely be a native. It doesn't need much supplemental water. If I time it right and I have these for the plant sale, sometimes they're in bloom at the plant sale, which means they fly out of the door before anything else does. So, because they're such a nice color. These want, they actually kind of like to drape over things. I do have to say that if you don't want lots of these plants, then what you either need to do is be vigilant about pulling up the seedlings, which is easy, or trim off the seed heads, which I never have time to do that. So I just pull stuff up if I don't want it there. And it has a silvery gray-green leaf, so it's really kind of an attractive plant. Primroses, we mentioned, these primarily bloom in the spring, but you can get sometimes a repeat bloom in the fall. And they like it under the shade of a tree, and they bloom early. This one is called an oxlip primrose, and it's got this nice, soft, buttery yellow color. Now, one of the later things to bloom, and you see it here with that Batali's Bright Gem again, is the windflower. And I've kind of given up on trying to keep it from spreading. It does spread gradually, and it's been in my bed long enough that it's pretty well spread. But you know, during the period of time where it's blooming, it is really pretty. And the wind kind of blows those flowers around really nicely. And then the rest of the year, it's a very pleasant green ground cover. So there's a couple different kinds of anemones. This would be a spring blooming. There's also a fall blooming one we'll look at later. Okay, and then another thing, I like blue. So I love Veronicas, and they also bloom in May. And these can also go quite dry. You know, they are very frequently found in rock gardens. I have one that's growing in my rock garden that I think I picked it up at the rock garden plant sale, but it's called Veronica Tymotes, variety Pseudocenaria. And it has fuzzy, pudgy, woolly little leaves. So this is not woolly cinquefoil, it's a different one. But it is very drought tolerant. So that's a fun one. I really have enjoyed that one. Very slow growing. It doesn't grow very fast, but it does eventually kind of drape over rocks and things. And the Turkish Veronica is really good, although I have noticed that it can, if exposed to wind in the wintertime, it can winter kill. So I think that might just mean it might want a little water, you know, during the winter times to keep it going. Let me see. But some other really good varieties are the woolly Veronica, and Snowmass is white. So there's a bunch of different colors ranging from deep blue to light blue or even white. So that's kind of a neat ground cover. All right, let's talk about, in June, we've got shade to part sun. And shade perennials are a little more challenging to build a bed from. Most of the shade perennials are going to be from a woodland setting, and they like typically woodland settings, really like hummock soils, really got a lot of organic matter in them, often are moist, and that's just not the type of soil we have here. So building a shade bed can be kind of challenging. However, very rewarding if you've got a nice shady spot. Most of them bloom May to June. And there are some fall blooming shade plants, but there are not very many of them. And so what you really have to look at is, for most of the year, what you're looking at is creating visual interest by using color and texture of leaf. So you're looking for lime green plants, maybe stuff that has cream in it, or variegated leaves, silver. And, you know, that just kind of brightens up your shade garden. So some of the classic shade garden plants are bleeding heart, Jacob's ladder, columbine, cranesbill, hostas, and ferns. All of those do well here. Okay, here's some bleeding hearts. And I want you to know, for the last 3 years since I planted this bed, I'll go out there excitedly, take these pictures. They're just starting to bloom. And then within a day or two, we have a hailstorm. So these poor plants, I honestly don't know if they'll be able to make it, because every year they've been pounded back to the ground. And I just don't know. I don't know how many times they can come back, but we'll keep trying. But anyway, you'll notice that middle one is the gold heart. It's got a bright chartreuse leaf, and boy, does it stand out against the others. The Valentine on the left-hand side there, it has almost kind of a reddish tinge to its leaves. It's kind of a pretty different. I got all 3 varieties growing there just to see what it looks like. All right, and then columbines. Now, columbines come in a huge variety of colors and shapes and sizes, and they readily cross-pollinate. So if you've got a bunch of different kinds of columbines, you're likely to start, if stuff starts coming up from seed, you're going to get some really interesting combinations, like that yellow centered one with the burgundy outer petals. I don't know what that one is. I didn't plant that one. It planted itself, and sadly it's gone. It's died now, and I sure enjoyed that one. So columbines are going to be another one of those short-lived perennials, but like I said, they reseed easily and they kind of can regenerate their population. Okay, Jacob's Ladder. This is a really good shade garden perennial, and the flowers are usually a nice medium to light blue. And what you have here on the variegated one is the Brie d'Anjou variety, and it's a nice one. It has that variegated leaf, and the flowers are a little bit lighter blue, almost like a cornflower blue. But some people don't like the smell of Jacob's Ladder. Some people think it smells like a skunk. And I can assure you that skunks are worse. But it does have a musky, almost skunky odor. When I was collecting the plants to plant the beds, I think I must have had, through some odd twist of fate, there was a bunch of Jacob's Ladder that hadn't sold at the plant sale. So I took home about half a dozen of them, and I had about 6 gallon-sized plants that I was going to put in my bed. And they sat underneath my deck, hiding from the hail for several weeks. And sure enough, when they started to bloom, because there were so many of them in such a small area, I was like, yeah, I could smell them. So you might want to think about how many you plant underneath your bedroom window. All right, so cranesbill. Now these are basically geraniums. Okay, so your houseplant geranium comes from, was developed from this genus of plants. Now, this, I kind of have it here halfway between shade and sun, because, and I show different varieties. There are hardy geraniums that grow in the shade, or that can take part sun. And then there's some that like full sun. So the ones that grow out in the middle of the montane meadows, those are full sun plants. So this is one of those plants that, you know, is pretty adaptable to whatever situation you might have. The one in the middle there is called Mavis Simpson, and it's a very nice cranesbill, and it is spreading. It's bigger than I want. So if anybody wants some, let me know. It's getting about to the time where I have to, it's crowding out my reticulated iris, and we just can't have that. So it's, yeah.
Kim, let's take a break.
I was just going to say, I think before we go into the sun, which was the next slide, I was going to take a break. So very well timed. How long do you want to break for?
Well, let's 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Excellent. I'll go give my daughter a good night hug.
And then I do have one question for you that's on chat.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to take that before we break or after?
Why don't you cover it after break?
Okay. See you in about 10.
Okay.
I brought you a present because I cannot read green right up there. It's so light. You have your very own marker.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I know when it's.
Sometimes it's like at the top where it's dark, that's okay, but it gets down to that light stuff and I'm like, oh, I can't see that. Yeah. I had an extra parrot there. And then Kristen told me, but then I can't with the picture.
It's a little on the dry side.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's been watered. No, I do. I'm a little nervous. I'm really close to the house. And its diameter is like that big. And kind of, I mean, he's like 4 feet from the house.
And the trunk is that big already?
Yes.
Yeah, someone years and years ago, it was probably a cute little plant, and they stuck it there. And
And he's,
and-
oh, he's huge.
Yeah,
Way taller than that.
yeah. Yeah, a little dry.
But is it it's a fir, I think.
What color is the trunk?
Brown.
Is there any weight to the trunk at all? Grayish. When you have a chance, look up at the upper part of the trunk and see if it's whitish gray. It doesn't feel like a foot. It does feel like a plane.
It does.
Yeah.
It has lots of cones. Lots of cones.
So lots of cones tells me it's stressed.
It is stressful. I would think so. It's really crowded where it lives. Right. And what worries me is it's right like gas. The gas and right behind it. And I don't want to cut it.
Yeah.
But it really is. It's in the corner of the yard. You know, here's the house. This is my neighbor's yard. And it's that corner of the house is right here. It sits right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's right smack up against the porch, in between the porch. And he is literally that big.
But that gas line is really worrying.
Yes. I was looking at him when I moved in. I asked the inspector if that interfering with the foundation. He goes, no, but I'd really worry about that gas line. I went, yeah. Well, I'm gonna have him come out and because I have to dig some things up. So I'm gonna have him come mark where everything is. That'd be fine.
Yeah, and that's always the sad thing because, you know, it takes them 20, 30 years to get that good.
And I'm betting that everybody that lives in like me. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, in fact, I can give you, I can even tell you how much she's grown. Yeah. Yeah, it's right there. And there's some colors.
No, you mean not for the cost, but for the part or your rent.
Just email me.
Okay, I will just, okay, we'll put a pin on.
Okay. Because you obviously didn't have my email. Well, this thing passed last week. Yeah, and that was recorded. And it wasn't that much. And the secretary has it. I'm just waiting for the edit so that we can have to post that on. I grew up in Wisconsin. Yeah, that was normal. They like we have lots of. There's little challenges. Yeah, they're cool. Yeah, and I had two of them, you know, but I had everybody sit now and was watching really close at home and Good, how are you?
Recorded ones on.
Oh, good. That's a good deal. Me too. Yeah, it looks like she's got quite a few of them. She's got a lot of work there.
So this is so this is so this is the node and then another node. So this is
When you buy a house. But I like the neighborhood. I like the area, you know, I like having a small house that I can take care of. Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I did quite a few. Where should And all I can see is the tree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Hey, Kim, you ready to go?
All right, we had a question come in before the break about weed barrier under mulch, wood or gravel. I have never found that I needed it if your mulch is sufficiently thick. Keep in mind that weed barrier will not stop things like cottonwood trees from coming up. So if it's a large, very determined weed, like even say quackgrass, I am not sure that it would stop quackgrass at all. And it does seem to decompose eventually, and then you're kind of stuck with having to replace it. I just make sure that my mulch is thick enough, and just be vigilant. Like milkweed does come up through a good chunk of wood mulch. So I just have to be vigilant about making sure I dig or pull those out if I don't want them in that spot. But I think it's extra work and extra money. That's what I think of it. Any other questions from the first half?
How big does garden do you have?
I work very diligently not to mow a lawn, so every year there's more. Actually, that's not true. I sadly had to put in a bluegrass lawn in my backyard. It's been a year ago, October. So I used to have an entire backyard full of Penstemon, and sadly, I had to put bluegrass in there. But, you know, our front yard, we have trained the bluegrass in our front yard where we only water it about every 3 weeks, sometimes every 4 weeks, depending on other natural precipitation. So I think we only mowed our lawn twice last year. So that's kind of how I like it. I like having something green that looks nice, but I really dislike having to take care of it. So the secret there is to balance your, how much fertilizer and water you put on it. And, you know, just enough to keep it green. If your lawn is still green at Thanksgiving time, it doesn't need more fertilizer. Just a rule of thumb I've come up with. Feel free to adapt your own yard as necessary, but yeah, you know, we only had to mow it twice. Of course, we had to get the swather out each time because especially the spring cutting, it was kind of long, but we had to wait for the crocus bulbs to finish recharging. At least that's what I tell everybody. Anyway, so speaking of water, I have actually a pretty small garden area, like vegetable garden, but then I have a nice size rock garden out front, and I'm going to try to expand that. And then I have a more traditional, you know, I have my shade garden underneath the neighbor's narrowleaf cottonwood tree. And then I've got a rain garden in my backyard, which is turning out pretty nice. And then I've got just a more traditional echinacea, clematis, kind of regular ornamentals. I've got a section of currants and strawberries, about 30 feet of those. And then I've got about 30 foot of Nanking. We're waiting for the cane borers to go away so I can plant raspberries again, and we'll have about maybe 60 feet of raspberries. So that's kind of what I got from my garden here and there.
How do you do with irrigation? Do you irrigate different zones?
So what we've done until, you know, when we put in the bluegrass lawn in the backyard, we also installed a sprinkler system. But prior to that, we had what my husband proudly calls a hillbilly sprinkler system, built with timers and valves and soaker hoses and sprinklers head, you know, all that. The drawback of that is, seems like the soaker hose was constantly breaking and water was running down the street before we knew it. And so it was a little problematic as far as the reliability. And we'd had like valves get stuck open, or the battery ran out, so the valves didn't come on, you know, all that sort of stuff. So it was much less reliable than the irrigation system that we've got now. Right now, we've got the kind where we can really customize when and if it comes on. It's smart enough to know that if we've had rain to not come on, or if it's winds above 40 to not come on. So it's kind of neat. Yeah, so we're still, last year was our first year with that. We still don't have the front yard on the sprinkler system, but that will be this year's project. But speaking of water requirements, this nice rock garden that you see in front of you, I water maybe once a month, maybe twice in a summer. So the next time somebody tells you that you have to put rock in to conserve water, go phooey on you. It's absolutely not true. You can have a phenomenal garden that's low water use and beautiful and green all year long. All right, so when we talk about sun perennials, they can usually take some shade, but they have to have at least 6 hours of sun in order to do their best. And what you'll see is if they're more shaded, they will not be as vigorous, or they may not flower as much. So just kind of keep that in mind. This particular garden, it's shaded till maybe 9 o'clock in the morning by our house, because it's to the west of our house. And then it pretty much gets full sun the rest of the day. So until the neighbor's house across the street causes a shadow to come across, but that's almost at sunset. So it does just fine. All right. So water requirements for these can vary from none, literally none, to wet. So just make sure you plan what you want in your bed and put all the same water requirements together. When a plant is labeled as xeric, that means when it establishes, it does not want any supplemental water, and you will literally kill it if you water it. So don't plant that anywhere where you plan to water stuff, okay? Drought tolerant species do really well here in Cheyenne. You usually have to give them a season to establish. So just, you know, they're not drought tolerant when you plant them. Once they're established, they're drought tolerant. Okay. There we go. Push the button harder. I think everybody ought to have one of these. This is a Missouri primrose. It is a native. It doesn't grow so much in the short grass prairie, but it does grow in parts of Wyoming for sure, and it does just fine here without any supplemental water. Its flowers will open in the evening, about the time when the temperature starts to drop, and then they'll stay open all night long and then close about the time it starts to get hot in the morning. So they're open for like 12 hours, say, something like that, a little more than 12. And the seed pods are just the absolute coolest things. They look like a flower themselves. That's an example of one down there in the lower right-hand corner. And there are many different cultivars of this now. Lemon drops, silver blade is another one that's real common. And the flower up there at the top right is just the plain old Missouri Primrose. Like I said, very, very cool plant. Its big bloom is in June, but it will consistently make flowers clear through till frost. So not as many, and just single day is all the blooms are good for. So kind of an interesting plant. Okay, sedums are something, or stone crop is something that, yeah.
Could you go back one more slide past the, one more? Those are penstemons. Do you know which variety of penstemons those are?
That is the Rocky Mountain Penstemon, Penstemon strictus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I've got, that's a Missouri Primrose right there in the middle. And I did have a bunch of other penstemons growing in there. They've, like I said, they're kind of a shorter lived critter. So they've all gone, have to plant more. Okay, back to stone crop. Stone crop is something that is really drought tolerant, very, very well suited to low water. And I got a couple of varieties here to show you. So this lovely yellow one on the right, you can see its leaves in the background there, and that's called oak leaf stone crop. And it's a cool one. It only gets about 6 to 8 inches tall, and it's a very nice medium green ground cover otherwise. And then down in the picture there with the pink phlox, that's dragon's blood stone crop, which is just a really cool color. Here's the Rocky Mountain Penstemon again. This was in my backyard. I could literally park myself in front of them and watch the butterflies. You know, I didn't have to chase this butterfly to take a picture of it. It came to me, so that's kind of cool. But like I said, we had to sadly get rid of it because the buffalo grass that we had planted there, since we put the addition on our house, just did not get enough sun, and we basically had a giant weed patch. Everything that wasn't penstemons was weeds. And it was getting to be a workload I didn't want to continue. So the Rocky Mountain Penstemon is a native. It needs absolutely no additional water, although if you water it during the blooming period, it will extend the bloom. And it likes bare soils to reseed, which is why it was taking over my backyard, because there was so much bare soil because of the buffalo grass that lots of penstemons were growing. The leaves are semi-evergreen. They'll turn kind of a pretty burgundy color during the wintertime. And it is just absolutely a fantastic flower for butterflies and bumblebees and honeybees. Just a fantastic plant for the pollinators. Another really good plant for pollinators, and it starts blooming in June, but it'll go through the whole season. Cat mints. Don't get catnip, because it is an unruly mint plant, which you'll regret planting very quickly. That being said, like Little Trudy is a cultivar that's really popular now. I think that's what this one is, but it's been so long since I planted it that I honestly can't remember. But this, oh geez, the bees all summer long just love this plant. So, and it honestly doesn't reseed that badly. And the seed, if you find a seedling, you can pull it up with not too much trouble. So this is a good one to have. Those cat mints are much better to plant than the catnips. Okay.
Flowering all season long.
Yes, yeah, all season long. You know, like its big flush is kind of in the June timeframe, but gosh, it would have flowers on it pretty much all year long till frost. Okay, and soapwort is another really good one. Here it is in all its glory in someone's rock garden. This is what soapwort does really beautifully, is it will drape over rock walls or in a rock garden, kind of mound up around rocks and what have you. Now it has a relatively short bloom time, maybe a week, 2 weeks, but it is absolutely gorgeous when it does. And it is a prolific reseeder. So if you don't want lots of it, you'll have to make sure to, you know, take your weed whacker to the seed heads before they develop or something. Or, you know, just dig up all the seedlings and bring them to the plant sale. I did that for many, many years. But yeah, this is a really lovely plant in a rock garden. It's growing here in this rock garden next to some snow in summer right there. And down in the very bottom corner is some lamb's ear, it looks like. All right, creeping phlox. Phlox subulata is a low growing, very hardy plant, ground cover type of plant, and it also will slowly grow, kind of look moundy in a rock garden. The kind that I think has been the longest lived for me is the emerald. This is emerald blue and emerald pink, and just a really nice plant. Every once in a while, it kind of grows out my sidewalk. I just whack it off and doesn't miss a beat. Then below that is candy tuft. That is another really nice mound forming kind of, I think it's a evergreen leaves or semi-evergreen. So it will form a nice mound and completely covered in these white flowers in about June. So that's a nice one. That'll spread maybe a couple feet wide. It only gets about 10 inches tall, maybe. Oh, hey, look, 6 to 12 inches tall and about 18 inches wide. I could read my own slide, I suppose. Oh, goodness. At least I pretty much answered same was what was on the slide. So here is another really, really nice thing to grow in your yard are poppies. And these are all oriental poppies that I show here, but Icelandic poppies also grow. Poppies bloom for 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how big a patch you have. And they're just eye-popping color when they go, usually. I mentioned the Princess Louise poppy, that's that pink one up there. And like I said, you think it would match other pinks, but boy, it didn't. So just kind of keep that in mind. Put a white plant or a yellow plant or silver plant in between the two of them. All right. Now, admittedly, this is kind of a all things asters and fleabanes kind of slide, but there are many, many different species and varieties. There are native asters and fleabanes, and there are, oh gosh, dozens of varieties that you can find in a greenhouse. But they bloom in June and are also quite nice. In my yard, the bunnies prefer the Professor Kippenberg aster, so I never get to see it bloom. Iris. Now this is something you could do a whole 3-hour presentation on iris, I think. There are just a huge variety of different colors and sizes. Most of the ones you see around town are going to be the tall bearded iris or the German iris. They're the most common and are very hardy here. The Siberian iris is also hardy, and that's an example of that would be a very common cultivar is called Caesar's brother, and that's that blue one on the left. And then I also have a native iris called the blue flag iris or just a meadow iris, and that is also obviously hardy here. It's just, it tends to want a little wetter soil than I normally want to give it. But in years, especially where we have, like this last year, we had, 30 some odd inches of snow. That was plenty of water for it to make nice irises last year. Okay, delphiniums. Again, this is something, these have really been something that they've been working on breeding new colors and varieties. And flower shapes and doubles and singles. And the thing about delphiniums is in this wind, you might want to think about putting them on in the lee of your house so that the wind doesn't break the stalks off, because even if you stake them, what happens to me is the wind breaks the flower spike off right where the stake is. So yeah, I've kind of tried to move my delphiniums down to the south side of my house so they're protected a little bit from the wind. And the hail. The hail does a number on them too. So they come in little tiny short varieties, just 12, 18 inches tall, clear up to 5 foot tall. So sky's the limit on these guys. And the middle of the flower is usually referred to as a B. So those are usually dark or white. And let me see. Sometimes you can get a repeat bloom in the fall, a very small, not usually large, but they sometimes can rebloom. All right, here's something else that you could literally do an entire presentation on, is daylilies. Now, they all kind of started out from the old-fashioned daylilies. There's one in the center bottom row there, just kind of orangish, real narrow petals. And from that, they have made an astonishing variety of daylilies, almost any color you want, although the blues and the deep reds are less common. They're single and double and ruffled and bullseyed and knot and fragrant. Some of them are fragrant, and some of them also have a rebloom in the fall. So that's something to look for if that's what you want. Okay, here we go. This has got to be one of my all-time favorite flowers, the blanket flower. This one will start blooming kind of in June-ish, and it will go clear to frost and even past. I don't know if you can see that butterfly there on that flower. There's actually about 4 or 5 of them in that picture, but they just blend with the flower so well that it's hard to see them. But that picture was actually taken in October, and it was still blooming, even though we'd had some frosts. And of course, the butterflies, when they come through, really seek those plants out. They get a little wilty if it's hot and dry. So I like to try to give them a little bit of a drink when it's hot and dry. Their leaves will tell you. Milkweed is a native plant that is very important source of pollen and nectar for our butterflies and our bees. And here again, I've just got a patch where I just park myself there with a camera. They parade themselves past me, and I can take all sorts of cool pictures. We even actually had a monarch lay its eggs, and this little caterpillar had the bad fortune of hatching on a plant that was directly below a robin's nest. Yeah, I don't think it made it to the point where it could go into its chrysalis. Like literally within a day or two after I took this picture, it disappeared. So I think even though birds may not like to eat them, the fact that there was a big juicy worm right below their nest might have outweighed the factor of it not tasting good. I don't know. That orange one in the middle is also a different species. So what I have in my yard is showy milkweed, and then this is the orange milkweed. It's really a pretty color of orange. It's a lot smaller flower. It's only about 18 inches tall. Here is a close-up of a native bee with a milkweed pollen sac on its claw, which I just thought was really cool to be able to see that. Okay, tick seed or coreopsis is another summer blooming, pretty low water plant. These can get, a whole range of sizes they've developed now. That center top is a native coreopsis that Catherine took a picture of for me from her prairie. And you can see the ones that are growing next to my milkweed are tall enough to compete with it. They're about 4.5, 5 foot tall. And just a really lovely plant. They don't wake up early, but they start blooming kind of end of June, okay, right about the time that the daisies bloom. All right, prairie wine cups. If you've not seen this plant, this is a very dramatic pink. It's a magenta fuchsia color pink. It's hard to describe, and I know my camera doesn't do it justice. This is a beautiful flower, and it is from a taproot, and it will spread about 2 to 3 feet in the branches will get 2 to 3 feet long. And if it's tucked in like with my milkweed and my daisies and coreopsis, it'll actually thread itself up. It doesn't normally climb, but just the way the other plants were, it was able to kind of thread itself in there. Looks kind of cool. Very rarely, seldom do you see a reseed on this one. But yeah, I was literally stepping around it when I was doing my fall cleanup at the end of October. It was still blooming because it's a little bit protected spot, but I finally told it, all right, gig's up, fella. Let's get done. Yarrows are another really good hardy perennial here. They come in all sorts of colors, but probably the most typical is a yellow color, and they gradually spread by rhizomes to make a patch. And it has a pretty long blooming season. Those flowers stay good for a long time and can be very drought tolerant when established. Daisies, golly, they come in all different heights. They come in the old fashioned varieties. They come in the newer, like doubled patented varieties now. That's a Real Glory, I believe. That's that variety there on the left. And I'd have to say that the old time varieties spread readily from seed. The newer patented varieties, I think, must be sterile because they don't spread from seed at all. And they also are much more polite. You can plant a gallon-sized plant and expect it to stay approximately that size for much, much longer time. Whereas daisies, they're going to spread and make a nice patch, and then you start sharing with your friends. Coneflowers are one of the most popular plants, and they are natives, and it's basically Rudbeckia is the genus name of that, and there's 25 different native species, and they have been breeding those to make doubles and all sorts of different cool colors. And so yeah, this is one of the most popular flowers out there. Echinacea is another one, and same thing with those. There's all sorts of native echinaceas, and Nancy Lummis loaned me this picture of the Angustifolia. That is the one up there in the upper right hand corner. And then, so that's a native, and you'll notice the petals are reflexed and really light pink. So it varies from that to the powwow wildberry in the lower right hand corner, where the really intense color. Most echinaceas are kind of that medium pink, though. That's what you think of when you think echinacea. There again, just kind of like with the coneflowers and the daisies, it seems like the newer patented varieties where there's double or triploid blooms, those are less likely to be sterile, and they may not even produce pollen for your pollinators. So just kind of be aware of that. If that's really important for you, you might want to steer away from you want to stick with the old fashioned varieties and the less messed around with genomes. But another real good bee magnet is the Monarda. Now that starts blooming later in the season. And that comes generally pinks, purples, and reds are kind of what the Monardas are. And they can be vulnerable to powdery mildew. So what you want to do is select a variety that is resistant to powdery mildew, and that will help you keep it under control. Also, deadhead the spent blooms if you don't want lots of Monarda everywhere. Here's that fall shade anemone I was talking about at the start of the presentation. This is, these are bigger plants. This is 3 to 4 foot tall. So this is literally like you have a shade garden and you don't know how to fill it up. You can put an anemone in there. They do bloom in September-ish, I think is, you know, August, September is when they like to bloom. There's some coneflower there in the background in that picture, so that kind of places it for you. And this is a photo from Catherine. Okay, so here's another fantastic staple for the garden, goldenrods. Some people are really allergic to these, but they are beautiful. So these will definitely draw bees, and there's even a wasp on this lower right-hand corner picture. I don't know if you can see it, but lots of pollinators come to see these plants. These are normally large plants, you know, 4 to 5 foot tall, and a lot of them are gradually arching. Fireworks is a really nice variety. Showy goldenrod is the one in the center on the bottom there. Nancy's picture there in the top center, that's a rigid goldenrod. It's a native species. Okay, fall asters. We're moving into fall now. These are also large plants, 3 to 4 foot tall. You want to put them at the back of your borders or back of your perennial gardens. These want full sun. I don't have them in a place where they get enough full sun, so I've had to move where I had to edit my garden and move them. But they can get nice and tall, and for several weeks in the fall, they are just covered with these lovely flowers. Usually have yellow centers. So that's purple dome on the left and the Alma Pachki on the right, that hot pink with the yellow center. And just bees and butterflies and they'll bloom clear through to the end, even past frost, even sometimes. So this is another really super good late season pollinator plant. Liatris, this is another native plant. It can grow without any additional water, although some of the, you know, cultivars that might be available in greenhouses may not be the full-on native hardiness. So if that's important to you, double check that, where you get that from and how hardy it is, with, you know, how water conservationist it is. But this one can even bloom into October. So this one is another really good late season, and it's purple. So a lot of the other late season flowers are yellow. So it's nice to have a blue or purple one. Rabbit rush, another really fantastic one. And these also make really great seeds for the birds. These do reseed some, but it's not obnoxious at all. And you might consider getting a dwarf variety, because typical rabbit brush can get 4 to 5 foot tall and wide. So it can be a huge shrub, and you probably don't want one that large in your rock garden or whatever. All right, now we have hit the end of the outside perennials. Do we have any questions on those?
Beautiful photo.
I have,
Go ahead.
Do you deadhead any or many of your perennials, specifically blanket flower?
I'm a kind of a lazy gardener. I don't deadhead, and I work full time and I parent a special needs child, so I literally don't have time. I mean, there's sometimes I can deadhead some things, and it's usually when I'm sitting on my front porch with a cup of coffee, you know, just enjoying the morning. So I don't do it consistently. So I tend to gravitate towards things where I don't have to deadhead, or I either that, or I just dig up the babies if I don't want them. So deadheading is one of those sort of things that if it requires deadheading, I'm not likely to probably want to grow that, because it's just not something I have time to do. Good question. Any other questions? No. Okay,
Kim?
well, yeah.
Would you define deadheading?
Oh, deadheading. I'm sorry. I must not have heard her question correctly. I apologize. So deadheading is when you remove the spent blooms, okay, before it can set seed. So like with the Monarda or some of the others that make a lot of seed and seed around, what you would want to do is cut as soon as the blossoms fade off, just trim them off. You can use your thumbnail. Sometimes some of them are tough enough stems you have to use like little snippers. And then that way you don't get seedlings where you don't want them. Sorry, I apologize. Didn't hear the question right.
It's okay. I have a question. For your daffodils, after the bloom is spent, do you fold the greens down and tie them off?
No. No, I literally daffodils are nice because they just kind of do what they need to do. And as they pull their nutrients back into their bulb to recharge, that stem just kind of dries. I don't ever feel the need to, you know, a lot of people do things like they'll trim iris leaves into a fan. They do things with the daffodils, and I just don't. I just let it be kind of natural.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, let's talk about houseplants real quick. And houseplants are one of those things that a large percentage of people have them. You know, maybe not everybody, but I think a lot of people have at least one houseplant. And, you know, they got it from an office going away party or get well soon, or, you know, from a florist or from a friend. I have many houseplants that came to me because somebody was moving and couldn't take all of their plants with them, or some people gave me plants to sell at the plant sale, but they weren't healthy enough to go to the plant sale. And by the time I'd kept them for a year, I thought, well, I'm just going to keep this plant. So you can find them everywhere pretty much. And it is nice to have something green and growing in your home. It does release oxygen into your environment and it uses your CO2. So it's a nice little symbiosis there. And also, I just think that the color green is good for our psyche, especially in some of the more dramatic color schemes that are popular today, like, you know, either the all white rooms or the dark walls. I mean, having a pop of green in there is really nice. And evidently, amongst the younger generations, caring for plants is one of the hottest hobbies. Who knew? I think quarantining might have helped that too, because people needed something to talk to. But yeah, so they're very cool plants. What was that?
It's called being a plant mom.
Yep. Yeah, no, seriously, it's a thing with the younger generations. They're like, pets are the new kids and plants are the new pets. Is how they put it. So like, okay. So most houseplants are actually of tropical origin. Most of them actually are understory plants that grow in the jungles of Southeast Asia. And as such, they like indirect light. They don't usually like full sun. They like high humidity and regular water. And they get really grumpy if you leave them next to an open window and there's cold air coming in. So they don't like cold drafts. Don't like to be by the front door when you're coming and going during the winter or that sort of thing. That being said, most of these, and there's a lot of them, there's a ton of different houseplants. They survive very well in the average home. You know, our ideal temperatures, 68 to 75, something like that, is maybe on the cool side for them, but definitely close to what they're liking. And humidity might be the thing though. Most of our houses are not that humid, but so here's some houseplant care. And by the way, this is one of the plants that made its way to my house before a plant sale. I've got no idea what that critter is. So if any of you do, let me know. I'd love to know what it is. So the biggest thing about houseplant care is to water them correctly. Most houseplants are killed because they're overwatered, not underwatered. They literally rot, okay? So these plants don't like to be in a swampy, mucky spot. They want pretty well-drained soil. They want, you know, they don't like to dry out, but they don't want to be consistently wet. So just keep that in mind. The water needs will vary by the type of plant, obviously. And also, if they're growing in very bright light, or they've got a couple hours a day where they actually have direct sun, they'll use more water than they would if they were further back on your kitchen counter where they're not getting any direct sun. The temperature of your room, if you've got it at 65, they're not going to use as much water as if it were 75, okay? Same thing with humidity. If you've got a humidifier running and you're trying to keep it at 50%, then it's probably not going to use as much water as if it were drier in your house, like 20, 30%. So there is a little trick you can do if you have to leave for a couple days and you can't have anybody over to water your plants for you. You can, for example, stick them in your bathtub, in your bathroom, turn lights off, and that will allow them to go another couple days without water. I wouldn't recommend doing that unless it was absolutely necessary, because one thing that can happen when it's dark and moist is fungus can start to grow, so you don't want that. When you water, allow them to dry slightly between watering. Okay, this is important. Use your finger to test. So if you poke your finger in there, it feels wet, or the dirt sticks to your finger when it pulls out, not ready to be watered yet. Let it dry out just a bit. You don't want to let it dry out completely. So I'm talking like the top inch, okay, where you stick your finger in. That should be, you should be able to move the soil around. It should be kind of dryish, not completely dry though. There's two reasons for this. One is because you don't want your plant to rot. And if you wait until it finger tests that it needs water, the recent snowstorm that made it dark and cloudy for the last 3 days won't have slowed down. You know, you're like, okay, yeah, it doesn't need water yet. It went a little longer than normal because of the weather. But the biggest reason, I think, not to keep your plants consistently wet is because of fungus gnats. Fungus gnats are nearly ubiquitous. They probably come home with your plant, okay? So they were in the greenhouse or in the florist shop or wherever else somebody had their office. I know our office has fungus gnats everywhere. So all of the plants have them because they fly around and find a new plant and lay eggs and start a new population. If you let it dry out sufficiently in between waterings, that will break their life cycle. So to minimize fungus gnats, the best thing you can do is water your plants accordingly. Fertilizer, there are some people that really don't like Miracle Grow. I use it all the time. Okay. On the other hand, I'm pretty judicious with it. I use the very diluted houseplant version. So like, I think it's like a 1/4 teaspoon for a gallon or something like that. And then when I water every week to 2 weeks, it's not a lot. And then every once in a while, I'll take 2-3 weeks and not put any Miracle Grow in it. If your plant is growing rapidly, like it's a pothos plant and it's growing a yard a month, it's going to need that fertilizer. If you have a very, 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 very slow growing plant and you over fertilize it, it can cause issues. Like this little plant here, it doesn't like very much fertilizer at all. So most of the time I just water it with tap water, which has enough salts in it anyway. Or not salts, but the calcium. So err on the side of not enough versus too much fertilizer, okay? I will say that. This is a Hartley Celadendron, and it's very happy. This was another one that came to me in preparation for a plant sale. Somebody gave it to me and said, here, I don't want this ugly thing, you take it. Well, it's not ugly anymore, so there. Most house plants want higher humidity than most of us have in our houses, at least in Wyoming, because you're either running the heater or an AC. If you're lucky enough to live somewhere where you can open your windows for a good portion of the year, the night air is higher in humidity, so that will keep your house higher in humidity. But as soon as the AC kicks on, it's going to pull that moisture out. But you can use a humidifier. You can even get the kind that humidifies right on the heater or on the AC. So that's a thought. If nothing else, though, you can certainly set up a pea gravel tray under your plants and fill that with water, and it just evaporates naturally and raises the humidity right around the plant. Alternatively, what you can do is just fill your entire house with houseplants, and then that kind of helps the humidity in your house. Seems to be that's what I'm doing. I don't know how that's working, but anyway, again, use the, I think I meant to put something else there, not a repeat of the last slide. So sorry about that with the fertilizer. Let's talk a little bit about pests on your plant pets. Pests usually come home with you when you bring the plant with you. So the best thing I can recommend to avoid having pest problems is to really look carefully at the plant. Fungus gnats are pretty easy to handle, okay? It's no big deal. I've brought home mealybugs before, and those are not easy to handle. That's a handful. Yeah, so just, and every time I've bought a majestic palm, I've brought home scale. And yeah, I threw both of my majestic palms out right before Christmas because I found out that the brand new ones I'd bought this last March had scale on them. So they went in the compost bin. I guess it was November because it was one of the last pickups. But anyway, yeah, I'm not going to be bringing majestic palms into my house again. I just don't need that headache. And other than using a systemic pesticide on them, which I'm not crazy about doing on inside plants, how do you combat that, right? This is too big of a problem. So spider mites, another typical inside indoor plant problem. Aphids, thrips, scales. I talked about scales and mealybugs already. So my dad loves to grow a hibiscus inside. That thing constantly has spider mites. I would not grow that type of a plant in my house because of the continual battle with the pest. So, you know, just kind of, but he loves it. So there you are. Be aware if you bring your plants in, if you leave them outside on your patio all summer long and then you want to bring them in, things like I've brought rosemary in, I've brought geraniums, begonias I've brought in. Absolutely, I brought my majestic palms in too. I had them out on my back patio all summer long and then brought them in. They will bring hitchhikers with them. They will bring bugs from outside inside. I have since decided I don't ever want to bring in another plant. It's not worth it to me. One year I brought my rosemary in and it had aphids on it, covered in aphids. The next year I brought it in and it had spider mites on it. I'm like, it's rosemary. What kind of critter eats rosemary? Well, obviously spider mites and aphids. Thrips are small enough, they'll come right through your window screens, and thrips are very common on outdoor flower pots. So I battle thrips a lot in my indoor plants. But like I said, fungus gnats, they're pretty easy to manage just with your watering, but BT will also kill them. BT doesn't have a smell. They make actual granules you can sprinkle on the top of your soil surface. So if you've got an established fungus gnat population, that might be the best thing to do. It just kills the babies while they're eating. And the thing about fungus gnats is they do eat your roots. So it's not super healthy for your plant. Big plants can withstand it unless it's a overwhelming population, but you can seriously impact smaller plants with fungus gnats. And the fungus gnats bring the fungus they like to eat to every flower pot they visit on their feet. So don't want them. Yeah.
Want to tell us what BT means?
Oh, it is Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. It's a bacterium. And what happens is when the pest ingests it, usually in the larval stage, it causes a terminal case of heartburn, so to speak. It plugs them up and kills them, usually within a very short period of time. So this is what you would spray your cabbage with to prevent cabbage loopers. They've developed strains now that are working on flea beetles. And also if you have the geranium budworm or the petunia worm that eats your flowers, your petunias, it works really well against any caterpillar that eats stuff. Now the fungus gnat actually is in the fly family, so its babies are maggots, and it kills those evidently just fine as well. So yeah, that's a good organic control method to use for a lot of different crops. It's absolutely not harmless to people or pets. It can have a little bit of a musty odor, but the BT granules like you'd put on an indoor plant, not so much. Those don't smell as far as I know. I'm still getting some for me because I need some on my orchids now.
Brand you recommend?
A brand? You know, I would go with just whatever you can find. I know that Tractor Supply has, I want to say Garden Safe is the brand they have, but you can get it at Lowe's, you can get it online. You really, it's everywhere. So I don't know that there is much of a difference between brands. So I'd go with whatever you can get easily. We have noticed some brands are stinkier than others. The Tractor Supply variety isn't too stinky. Sorry, I didn't hear that last one.
Granules over the spray?
It typically doesn't come as a spray.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's either going to come. So BT is best known as those mosquito dunks. And you can get them at the big box stores and hardwood stores, and you throw them in your ponds and streams. And so that's pretty typically what it is. And the strain that we're talking about tonight is Israeliensis. So you want BTI for Israeliensis.
Right. And that's the one that'll work on fungus gnats and mosquito larvae and that sort of thing. So yeah, really just, I would check online is what I would do, so you can kind of compare prices and brands. So what we often buy, like the Garden Safe comes in, I want to say like a pint size, and then you dilute it. It's a liquid and you dilute it in water. But I know they come as powders, they come as granules, they come in wafers, you know, like if you're going to put in a pond, it's a wafer kind of thing. There's a lot of different forms. All right. Other things you can use for insecticide are insecticidal soaps, rubbing alcohol, and surfactants like dish soap, or there's even some surfactants that are made from bacteria, I think, that, believe it or not, are surfactants that can cause basically the thin-skinned insects. If you remove those oils and the waxes on their skin, they dehydrate to death fairly quickly. So the problem with that is, of course, it just kills whatever it touches, so you have to reapply. You have to be vigilant. Same thing with rubbing alcohol. That's how it works. Okay. But the biggest thing that you're going to fight with indoor houseplants is the fungus. So there again, just be really careful with how you water. I once killed a dumb cane plant because I didn't realize that it was cold and dark where it was growing, and it wasn't using all the water I was putting in. And sure enough, it rotted off right at the soil level. Plunk. So propagating houseplants is fall off a log kind of easy. Because most of these are, like I say, jungle plants, and they are designed to creep along the ground, up trunks, whatever. They come built to be propagated. So if you'll notice on the lower left here, these little kind of warty protrusions on the stem, those will turn into roots. If you drop them into a glass of water, within a week, they'll start growing roots. Now, on the right-hand side is some pothos that have been growing for about 4 to 6 weeks. So they're ready to be planted. And then if you'll notice this little green spur over here coming off at the same place where the roots are at that same node, there's an existing leaf, there's these little root buds, and here's a whole new stem happening right there. So that's how you do it. You just whack off a chunk and chop it up with a pair of scissors and put it in a glass of water. And usually they don't even need rooting hormone, and they will make new plants within 6-8 weeks. Now this is a Chinese evergreen, and this one does take a lot longer to root, on order of months, but you don't need to do it that often. It doesn't grow that fast. So some popular foliage house plants are pothos and spider plant. Probably everybody has seen those and knows what those are. Dracena, snake plants or mother-in-law's tongue, peace lilies, palms, philodendrons, bamboo, figs, aloe vera, jade plants, ivies, dumb canes. Dumb canes are poisonous. So, if you've got kids or pets, or have a friend that likes to graze on your house plants, you might want to check that out. See which ones are poisonous to pets. I think there's stuff online where you can search that. And Schefflera, true cactus plants. Now those are some that like full sun, and you can let those dry out completely in between. But Norfolk Island pine is actually a small tree. Chinese evergreen, like the one in the picture there. Monstera is actually, I guess, the most popular houseplant now. It's, I always thought of it as a philodendron, but I don't think it is. But it's got these big plate-sized leaves with big cuts or, splits in the leaf. It's a very dramatic looking plant. And then the ZZ plant. The ZZ plant is called that because nobody can pronounce its biological or botanical name. And I'm not even going to try. But that also is very easy to root. You just snip off a leaflet and put it in moist soil, and voila, about 6 weeks later, it'll start forming a little nodule under the soil and send up its first stem. And I've even cut off an entire stem, plunked it in some water thinking I would take care of it later, and darned if those things didn't root from the cut. So, I mean, it took them months to do that, but all of a sudden I looked down in the bucket and I'm like, there's roots in there. It's amazing. Stuff grows. All right. Here's some popular blooming houseplants. Christmas cactus, which actually comprises Christmas and Thanksgiving, just slightly different requirements for how much dark they want. Down the lower left corner there, that is a, I think that's the Christmas cactus. It wants to bloom around Christmas time. And the big plant there in the middle, I call it a Christmas cactus, but it actually wants to bloom closer to Thanksgiving and Easter. So that's when its photo period is happy. But this plant is big enough, it actually has a small number of blooms on it almost continuously. I don't exactly know why, because it's supposed to be triggered by day length or dark length. But I'm not going to argue. It's happy. So let it be. I have to, it's up on about a 3-foot tall stand, 4-foot tall stand, because my cat will eat it otherwise. Okay, so whoops, we need to go through all the different kinds here. We got Easter cactus. Now that's a different kind of what is loosely called a Christmas cactus, but it is completely different looking flower. Shamrocks, lilies, the peace lilies, African violets. I am not successful in growing African violets. Anthuriums, amaryllis, cyclamens, bromeliads, begonias, and orchids. So I don't do very many of those other than the Christmas cactus. Had begonias, but they got a fungus and succumbed. So I don't plan on growing those again. But I can grow orchids. So we could do a whole 3-hour presentation on orchids. So if you ever want me to, let me know. Orchids are the largest family other than Asteraceae of the flowering plants. And that's possibly because they are one of the oldest families. They've done some genetic analysis and estimated that even 100 million years ago, there was already orchids and they were already speciating, because that's about when the continents started to break up and drift apart. And so they already were there. They've found fossilized orchid pollen in amber and just all sorts of cool stuff. But there are currently about 28,000 accepted species and about 763 genera. They comprise about 10% of all seed plants on Earth, and they are highly specialized in their environs and their pollinators. There are orchids all over the planet, even up in the Arctic Circle, which you wouldn't expect. But most of them are tropical, obviously, but there are very many of them all over. They tend to be highly specialized with their pollinators, so they're often on the endangered species list. For example, like the Ute Ladies Tresses orchids that grow in Colorado, they're threatened endangered because their habitat and their pollinators are kind of disappearing. So, however, since the 19th century, when it got to be all the rage to grow orchids and roses in hothouses in England, horticulturists have been producing hybrids and new cultivars, and now there's more than 100,000 of them. So if you've got the knack for it, boy, howdy, that's a career you can get into, because it's hot demand for orchid varieties. This orchid right here is called the coconut orchid, and it's native to Mexico, kind of like the Yucatan area of Mexico. And it smells like coconut when it blooms. And I don't mean just a little bit. I mean, like you walk into a room and it's like, oh, coconut. So if you like coconut, this is a good one to get. If you don't like coconut, I would not recommend getting it. So these are the typical, most common varieties of orchids that you will find. Phalaenopsis, the moth orchid, is the most common. It is what they call a starter orchid. Almost everybody has seen them in the grocery stores, the florists. You often even get gifted them on Valentine's Day, for example, or Mother's Day. They'll give you an orchid, and most people say, now what do I do with it? It stopped blooming, now what do I do with it? Well, you can, very easily keep them and they'll bloom for you next year if you know how to do it or want to learn how. They do not have to get tossed in the trash as soon as the bloom fades. Another very common one is called the lady slipper orchid. I don't have a picture of that one. Phragmipedium is a related to the lady slipper orchid, and that's the picture I have here. So you can see it kind of has that cup at the bottom, and that looks like the lady slipper. And then dendrobiums are another really popular orchid. You can see those in the grocery stores occasionally, and some species of the dendrobiums are what they make the Hawaiian leis out of. And if you can imagine having that many orchids around with that many blooms that you can literally make necklaces that will last only a day or two is phenomenal to me. Just mind-blowing. Cattleya is another very common orchid that you see. These are the ones they usually make the corsages out of. They happen to be my favorite orchids. There's a pansy orchid, it's called. It's a Miltonia. And then Oncidium is another pretty common one. Usually these are the ones that you're going to run across in most big box stores or grocery stores or florists. Orchids have two different types of growth patterns. The first being monopodal, which means they just have one growth node per plant. An example would be like a Phalaenopsis orchid, the moth orchid. Down in the bottom corner here, you see the big, wide green leaves. They literally grow one, maybe two leaves a year, and it always comes out of the top of the plant, okay? And as it grows, the bottom ones die back. They don't have any way to store water, so they're pretty much reliant on you giving them water. Sympodial means there's more than one growth node per plant, and the upper picture is a picture of a Cattleya orchid who's literally growing out of its pot saying, let me out of here. I want to be free. I want to be growing on a tree. But you can see how they kind of use their roots to prop themselves up and attach them to whatever surface they're growing on. This would be an example of an epiphytic orchid. Phalaenopsis are also epiphytic in nature. They usually grow in the crotches of trees, and they will even grow upside down. So one of the things that's odd about people is we like things to stand up nice and straight, even so that the orchid is actually growing upside down as far as it knows. So it's a kind of a continual thing to try to make sure your orchid doesn't flop over. But yeah, some of them grow in soil, some of them grow on rocks, but most of them are epiphytic, which means they grow without soil on the surface of a tree or plant or something like that. Some orchids, including the Phalaenopsis and the dendrobiums, will reproduce by making a little baby plant on the stem. You can induce that hormonally. Some people are successful with that. I've never tried it, but you can do that. And eventually that will turn into a whole nother plant. A leaf will start, and then some roots will start. And once it gets enough leaves and roots, you can separate it from the parent plant and have a whole new clone. Orchids grow slowly, okay? They don't grow fast. Usually, as far as the Cattleyas, if you get 2, maybe 3 stems a year, that's doing really well. If you get 2 Phalaenopsis leaves a year, that's doing really well. Orchids are actually really easy to take care of. They don't want much. They just want it consistently. Okay, that's the key. In our busy world, you have to be able to provide things to them on the schedule that they need. There are some varieties that want to take a winter break from water. And you know what? I rarely worry about that, and I still get blooms. It's one of those sort of things. If it works in my house, it works. And if it doesn't, it'll either die or I find it another home. You know, you just have to know what kind of watering, light requirements, and fertilization requirements your orchid needs, and then, you know, commit to that schedule, whatever it is. I'm not going to go into the cultural requirements for each type of orchid because, like I said, that could be a 3-hour presentation, and it's so different. There are so many different kinds of even just dendrobiums that it would be pointless for me to say, okay, dendrobiums want this. On the other hand, if you are investigating getting orchids, the best resource I can recommend to you is the American Orchid Society. There's their website down there, and they have care sheets for each genus of orchid. And it'll even break down into, oh, okay, it's a Miltonia or a Miltoniopsis. And if it's a Miltonia, it wants this. And if it's this, it wants that. And so, I mean, you can really dial in on what to provide your orchids. And then, like I said, I really have enjoyed orchids. And if there's another orchid enthusiast out there, please reach out. I'd be lovely to talk orchids with you. Really quickly here, the top center there, that red one is a pansy orchid or a Miltonia. The one on the right is a Cattleya orchid. This is a massive flower. This flower is probably 6 to 8 inches across, top to bottom, and probably 5 inches wide. When this plant was super happy, it was producing 2 flower stalks, each with a couple flowers on it a year. So it was very happy. I then moved it. Unwise, I know, but it's not happy with me yet. It will be again. I put it back where it was, so it should be fine. The middle one on the bottom is a dendrobium. And this was one I bought at the orchid show down in Denver. Denver Orchid Society. They have a show once a year, kind of in March, I think. And they usually have all sorts of cool orchids to buy down there. And this little one is tiny. The flower's only about maybe a ½ inch wide. And I call it the cherry blossom orchid because it just reminds me of cherry blossoms. But anyway. All right, so there's our program, folks. Be happy and garden. This is one of my penstemons. This is a Red Rocks penstemon, Neomexicali, that is just ideally sized for native bumblebees.
It's amazing how that works. Kim, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Do we have any questions?
Any questions?
Somebody asked me to go back one slide to the purple flowers. I'm sorry, I have no idea when that chat came in.
Right. We covered that one already.
Okay.
We're good.
Oh, you're very welcome, you guys. It was a lot of fun. And like I said, if you have any desire to come see the rock garden, or even if you have some desire to have some of those plants, by all means, I need to be editing my garden again. So would not mind sharing.
Thank you. All right, Kim, thank you very much. You have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Yeah, I